Margaux Hemingway, an iconic model, actress, and a member of one of America's most famous families. She graced the covers of magazines, dazzled on the runway, and lived in the limelight. But behind the glamour, Margaux's life was not as perfect as it seemed. And one day, a friend would make a macabre discovery that would shock the world. Margaux Hemingway's story is one of beauty, success, and tragedy. Born into a famous family, her grandfather, Ernest Hemingway, one of the most celebrated authors of all time, Margaux was destined for the public eye. But fame brought its own set of struggles. As she battled her inner demons, the pressures of the modeling world, and the weight of her family's legacy, her life began to unravel. And on one fateful day in 1996, it all came to a tragic end. By the time of her death, Margaux had already been through years of struggles with addiction, mental health issues, and the immense pressures of trying to live up to both her own success and the legacy of her family. She had spent much of her life under the shadow of her famous grandfather and the Hemingway family's notorious history of mental illness and suicide. But no one expected what was about to happen. In July of 1996, a close friend of Margaux's grew worried after not hearing from her for several days. Concerned, this friend made the decision to visit her apartment. What they found upon entering was a scene that no one could have imagined. Margaux Hemingway had died alone in her apartment. There was no sign of life, just a haunting silence. It was immediately clear that something was terribly wrong. The glamorous, vibrant woman who once dominated the world of fashion was gone, her body discovered by someone who cared deeply for her. But that wasn't the end of the story. An autopsy was performed, and the results stunned everyone. It was initially believed that Margaux had succumbed to natural causes. But the truth was far more horrifying. The medical examiner concluded that Margaux Hemingway had taken her own life. She had overdosed on a lethal combination of barbiturates. The news of her suicide shocked the world. How could someone so beautiful, so famous, end their life in such a tragic way? But the signs had been there all along. Margaux had fought long and hard against addiction and depression. She had been open about her struggles, but like so many others, her cries for help were not enough to save her. The Hemingway family was no stranger to tragedy. Margaux's grandfather, the legendary Ernest Hemingway, had also died by suicide. And as it turned out, mental illness and addiction were demons that haunted the Hemingway bloodline for generations. Margaux's death was yet another chapter in the heartbreaking legacy of one of America's most famous families. Her death raised difficult questions about fame, mental health, and the pressures that come with living in the public eye. For Margaux, the weight of expectation, both as a Hemingway and as a top model, proved to be too much. Behind the flawless exterior was a woman struggling to hold on. Margaux's friends and loved ones spoke of her warmth, her generosity, and her kindness. But they also knew of her pain. They knew how hard she fought to escape the darkness that had taken so many in her family before her. But in the end, it was too much. Margaux's tragic end is a reminder of the toll that mental illness can take, even on those who seem to have it all. Fame, fortune, beauty, they couldn't protect her from the inner demons that plagued her. In the end, she was alone. And the world lost a woman who had so much more to give. Margaux Hemingway's death was more than just a tragedy. It was a cautionary tale about the cost of living in the spotlight and the heavy burdens we sometimes carry in silence. And while her life ended in darkness, her story is one we must never forget. Margaux Hemingway was not just another model. She was the face of an era. The woman who, in many ways, embodied the glitz and glamour of 1970s fashion, yet beneath that shimmering exterior, lay a woman who carried a weight no one could truly understand. Born into the legendary Hemingway family, her name alone was enough to create sky-high expectations. But for Margaux, living up to the Hemingway legacy would prove to be a nearly impossible task. Her grandfather, Ernest Hemingway, was a literary giant, but his life was filled with as much turmoil as brilliance. He took his own life in 1961, leaving behind a family that would continue to grapple with the darkness he couldn't escape. Mental illness, addiction, and suicide seemed to hang over the Hemingway family like a shadow that would follow Margaux her entire life. Despite her success as a model, and later as an actress, Margaux's life was far from the picture of perfection it appeared to be. She fought a long and painful battle with alcohol, drugs, and depression. Her struggles were no secret, as she often spoke about them publicly, but few knew the depth of the pain she carried. A pain that stemmed not just from the pressures of fame, but from the scars left by her family's history. In the years leading up to her death, Margaux's career had taken a downturn. The glamorous gigs had dried up, and she found herself drifting further away from the life she once knew. She struggled with sobriety, her mental health was fragile, and financially, she was struggling to stay afloat. It was a far cry from the days when she was one of the highest-paid models in the world. Margaux Hemingway's death, on July 1, 1996, would forever change how people viewed her. On that fateful day, her friend arrived at her apartment after days of silence. The scene was one of eerie stillness. Margaux was found lifeless, having died alone in her apartment. It was initially assumed that she had died of natural causes. After all, she was only 41 years old, young enough to have had many years ahead of her, but the truth was far more devastating. After an autopsy was performed, it was revealed that Margaux had died by suicide, the cause of death being a lethal overdose of barbiturates. The news sent shockwaves through Hollywood and the fashion world. How could someone who once seemed to have it all, beauty, fame, and fortune, fall so far, so fast? The tragedy of Margaux's death wasn't just that she had passed away. It was the fact that, in her final days, she was utterly alone. She had retreated from the world, distancing herself from friends and family. Her death was a chilling reminder of the loneliness and isolation that so often accompany mental illness. Despite her fame, despite her name, in the end, Margaux felt as though she had no one to turn to. At her funeral, those who knew her spoke of Margaux's warmth, her generosity, and her spirit. But they also spoke of the pain she had carried for so many years. A pain she couldn't shake, no matter how much she tried. And in the end, the darkness that had claimed so many in her family claimed her too. Margaux's death, like her life, serves as a stark reminder that no amount of fame or fortune can shield someone from their inner demons. Mental illness doesn't discriminate. And for Margaux, the combination of addiction, depression, and the weight of her family's legacy proved to be too much to bear. The Hemingway family, one of the most celebrated in American history, has endured more than its fair share of tragedy. From Ernest Hemingway's own suicide to Margaux's untimely death, the family's legacy is not just one of brilliance, but of profound sorrow. Margaux's death, in many ways, was the final chapter in a story of intergenerational pain that stretches back decades. In the end, Margaux Hemingway's life was a complex tapestry of beauty, pain, success, and struggle. Her story is a cautionary tale, one that reminds us of the importance of mental health, and the dangers of living in the relentless spotlight of fame. She may have been a Hemingway, but Margaux was also her own person, someone who deserved more than the tragic end she met. Thank you for watching. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, remember that help is always available. Let's honor Margaux Hemingway's memory by continuing the conversation about mental health, addiction, and the pressures of living in the public eye. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one.